Welcome to the new JFK Show, number 214. After a very popular show last week with John Hankey, we're on to new things, and Larry Rivera and Dr. Jim Fetzer with me tonight, and we're going to turn it over to Larry right away.
Hey, how you guys doing tonight?
All right.
Let me see. Bad situation going on there in the Panhandle and going up Georgia. I feel for those people because, I've been there and done that, and it's kind of painful to see, all those images coming through on the TV. But anyway, we pray that everything works out in the best. So anyway.
It's going to work out, Larry. It's going to work out just fine for a certain
group. The advantage is
everybody else has to leave town.
The advantage is being on the mainland. Help can arrive, real fast. But in Puerto Rico's case, that was the disadvantage. Yeah.
It was incompetence and neglect, Larry. There's no doubt.
Yeah. Obviously. Anyway.
Senator Russell.
Tonight, we want to do something here on a very, very special and important relationship. And we're talking about here Senator Richard Russell and Harold Weisberg. Richard Russell was one of the Warren commissioners, and he and a couple of others behind closed doors did not believe the official version of what happened in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. And we're going to explore and expand a little bit on that relationship because I don't think it's given enough importance in play, in the JFK assassination saga. And we're going to start here with a short show that Leno Sanik did 5 years ago. And obviously, we like to give props, to other researchers and people that study the case. But in this case, I want to show this briefly. It's only 8 minutes long, and then we'll expand a lot more on what he was trying to convey in this clip. So I hope, can you guys see this?
Yep, go for it.
Okay.
Crank it up really loud.
Yeah, let me give you some V.
I mean, ridiculously loud.
On the American public. Now your host, Leno Sanik.
Even though the Warren Commission hedged some of its bets, such as acknowledging they never could assign a motive to their assassin, the conclusion of a single gunman being responsible for the president's death, and that there was absolutely no conspiracy has always been a hallmark of the commission's shoddy work. Indeed, ever since the Warren Commission handed in its final report, the American establishment has treated any dissent from this official position as a sign of disloyalty, unworthy, and as a mark of a conspiracy theorist. Never has honest political historical research been mentioned. But a little-known fact is the first critic of the Warren Commission was on the Warren Commission itself. His critique, like so many other facts, have been covered up. Author Gerald McKnight tells the story of the first dissenter, Senator Richard Russell.
This is Gerald McKnight, the author of Breach of Trust. Russell is the first dissenter of the Warren Commission report, and he was on the Warren Commission. Russell is not like these clowns we have in the Senate today. This guy was serious business. Russell was elected to the upper house in 1933. He was a senior member of the upper chamber and respected by his colleagues on both sides. He was even celebrated as the quote-unquote dean of the Senate by Ted Kennedy, who of course had different views than Russell on the civil rights question. He spent a lot of time and energy, unfortunately, in trying to prevent any kind of progress for black people in this country. And he was speaking for Georgia. He's a segregationist in that sense. He was wrong. But he was able to work with the Democrats on other issues. And he was highly respected. Russell was horse-collared by President Johnson to be a member of the Warren Commission. Russell protested, but Johnson had his way by telling Russell it would not take all of his time. And even more instrumental was LBJ's tactic of dangling in front of Russell the prospect that unless the American people were satisfied that Kennedy was the victim of a lone assassin, that right-wing elements in the nation might push this country into a confrontation with the Soviet Union with the prospect of 40 million dead Americans. Now, he used that on Russell, he used that on Warren also, who was reluctant. But once Warren got that kind of pitch, he broke into tears and said, I'll work on the commission. It should be noted that all of LBJ's choices for the commission, after each was waved under Hoover's nose for his approval, none of them, Democrats or Republicans, were supporters and were political allies of President Kennedy. Russell spent most of the life of the Warren Commission absenting himself from the work and sometimes even skipping the executive sessions. In May, FBI Director Hoover addressed the commission. He was quick to assert that there was, quote, not a scintilla of evidence showing any foreign or domestic conspiracy in the Kennedy killing, unquote. He went on in the same vein, launching a preemptive strike against any future dissenters and critics of the commission and, by extension, the FBI, the commission's investigative arm. The irony here is that little did Hoover suspect that the first dissenter of the official story was Senator Richard Russell.
Well, they were trying to prove that the same bullet that hit Kennedy first was the one that hit Charlie. Went through him, through his hand, his bone, and through his leg. Everything else, just a lot of stuff there. I couldn't get all the evidence and cross-examine all of it. But I didn't read direction.
Well, what difference it make which bullet got Conley?
Well, it don't make much difference, but they said that they believe that the commission believed that the same bullet that hit Kennedy hit Conley. Well, I don't believe it.
I don't either.
And so I couldn't sign it. I said it got contest by direct contrary, and I'm not going to prove that. So I finally made them say there was a difference in the commission, and that part of them believed that wasn't so.
On September 18th, 1964, Senator Russell forced a special executive session of the commission. Russell explained to his commission colleagues that he could not sign a report stating that the same bullet that hit President Kennedy exited his body, went into Connolly. This would be part of the we recognize essential to the single bullet theory, which was essential to the contention that there was one shooter and that shooter was ours. He had some reservations, and he wanted these in the record because he wanted his constituents who put him into office. He respected in the terms that that's why they put him in office, to be a caretaker and to look after their interests. Kentucky's Republican Senator John S. Cooper was persuaded to join Russell in his dissent, and Louisiana's Hale Boggs was wavering and tilting toward also joining the dissenters and rejecting the single bullet explanation. It should be noted that Russell's rejection of the single bullet theory was part and parcel of his displeasure of the quality of the FBI investigation and the information it fed to the commission. After an exhausting morning search for some mutual solution to the impasse, John McCloy came up with language that both the majority and the Russell faction could reluctantly agree upon. Russell's contention to the single bullet theory was softened to a degree by his insistence that the report include language categorically conceding that Oswald could not have carried out the assassination on his own. While the special September session ostensibly came equipped with stenographers who were presumably recording the session for the record and for posterity, this was all a fiddle. Rankin, and it had to be with Warren's permission, had the whole thing staged, and it was nothing more than an empty performance. Russell was aware that a stenographer was in the room while the commission was in session, but the stenographers were not even bothering taking notes. They were hired by Rankin to deceive Russell. There was, in fact, no record made of the September executive session called by Russell. Harold Weisberg, I was a neighbor of his, one of the early critics of the Warren Commission, and really one of the more successful critics, learned from rumors circulating in Washington that the September 18th session was a fakery. He contacted the National Archives in Washington, D.C. for a copy of the verbatim transcript. He learned that there was no record of any session, just some quote-unquote secretarial business notes about when the commission members could expect copies of the Warren report and other innocuous tripe. When Weisberg showed Russell Archibald Rhodes' letter, Russell was aghast. This kind of suppression was outside his experience on his 40 years in Capitol Hill. He resigned his chairmanship from the Military Affairs Committee and divested himself of his oversight responsibilities on the CIA. He urged Weisberg to continue his work on the Kennedy assassination. And so we have here Russell, who emerges as the first dissenter of the Warren Commission report. He never changed his mind about Oswald as the assassin of Kennedy, but he believed that Oswald had not acted alone.
Stay tuned for the next installment as we expose week after week 50 lies the Warren Commission would like you to believe.
Dr. Spencer, we picked apart every single one of these. That was the very beginning of the new JFK show.
I know.
This establishes the base of what I wanted to present tonight, because I have actual documents that show the actual relationship that existed between Senator Russell and Harold Weisberg. In fact, how it began in 1966 and went all the way through until the senator's death in 1971, I believe. And it's really fascinating, the information that is available at the Weisberg site, because it expands, like I said, on everything that Len reported there, and just being able to show that there were Warren commissioners that did not believe the official version, and that were aware that what was being played on the American public is just astounding. You know, for example, we know that Hale Boggs died in a mysterious plane accident in Alaska.
Yeah, he was Louisiana. He was from Louisiana.
That's right, and he was another one of the dissenters who just did not believe that crap about the single bullet theory. Now that executive session that they're talking about of September the 18th, 1964, I have a copy of that, and it's really amazing what they did. They completely falsified the record, and they came up with a report of an executive session that never happened. And that's when Senator Russell, started to work with Harold on this. And they started to exchange information, and Harold started to give him information about all of his FOIA requests and all the information that he was getting from the government and the National Archives. And it was an ongoing relationship, like I said, until Senator Russell died. And in fact, they had a secret pact to not go public with any of the work that they were doing until either of them passed on. And it's just fascinating to read about this. And the first document I want to present here is this one. And this is a 16-page letter or document that Harold wrote. And it just about gives you the entire breakdown of that relationship, and how they met, and how the whole situation unfolded between the two. For example, here, as you can see right here, my secret relationship with Russell began with a May 14, 1966 letter. The intermittent correspondence continued into 1970 to just before his death on January the 21st, 1971. Senator Russell had emphysema and from smoking. And he died of lung cancer at a very young age. Nowadays, 73, is nothing. But as you can see here, it required 2 more years of the most meticulous investigation before I could put in Russell's hands the kind of definitive evidence he required. A senator of his stature, and I also have to mention that LBJ had been a protege of Senator Russell, believe it or not. And so it's sort of ironic that when LBJ corners Russell, to be on the Warren Commission, and Russell's first response to LBJ was, "Hell no, I won't go." And then to his amazement, the next day, LBJ announces that Russell's on the Warren Commission.
Trying to strong-arm him, twisted his arm.
Yeah. So it's, like I said, it's really, really an incredible relationship that we only know about this intricacies of this relationship because of Harold Weisberg's records. And so I'll try to just glance over this and see, what the main points here. If you guys see anything here you want to discuss.
That's a good spot right there. He said he disclosed.
Yeah. Here, Johnson had asked him to serve, and Russell declined. Go ahead, Jim. Let's get you involved here.
Johnson had asked him to serve, and Russell declined because of his leadership assignments. He was head of the Southern Democrats and carried a heavy load of committee work. He believed he had convinced Johnson he could not accept any added responsibilities. To his surprise and dismay, he learned from the media the next morning that Johnson had nonetheless appointed him to the commission, its senior member. Russell described Johnson as a fox and believed Johnson's real reason was to prevent my leading the fight against civil rights legislation. But I fooled him, he chuckled. I led the fight against civil rights and ignored the commission when I had to. It's a great tragedy that the able Russell did not understand Johnson's real purpose, to exploit Russell's reputation among conservatives. Had Russell stopped to think it through, he would have realized how unprecedented it was that of the 7 members of the commission, 5 were of the minority party, and neither of the 2 Democrats, of whom he was one, were followers of the assassinated president. The Warren Commission is the conspicuous exception to the rule that the party in power always controls all committees and commissions. Russell attended only 6 of the commission's numerous regular sessions, all of which were secret. The last of these he also forced, but by then the 900-page report was written and in page proof. That hearing, of course, it was 888, so it may be that 12 pages were excised. That hearing was held on Sunday, September 6, 1964, beginning at 3:20 p.m. and in deepest secrecy at the U.S. Naval Air Station at Dallas, Texas. Behind tightest security, the questioning, which Russell dominated, lasted until 8 p.m. Russell had read and was troubled by and did not credit the earlier testimony of Marina, widow of the accused assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. Russell had the right instincts, but because he had not really participated in the commission's work, lacked factual basis for his diligent cross-examination. It was nonetheless effective. It was also ignored in the report as published. That rare Sunday hearing, behind the military guard added to the commission's practice of complete secrecy, was a too-late dramatic climax. Russell wondered aloud if the FBI had withheld evidence. Marina, who had earlier and again in total secrecy admitted lying, changed her story in vital ways, sometimes turning around 100%. The net result of this extraordinary proceeding, that went entirely unnoted, was to fortify Russell's apprehensions about and disbelief in the evidence adduced.
Yeah, what's going on here, obviously, is that Russell is the one that, brought Marina's lies out to the forefront here, Jim, and we never heard about this.
This is fascinating stuff.
This is like he's the one that, and then this was in total secrecy. Okay, and which is something that a lot of people have suspected all along, that Marina was part of this whole thing, and or maybe in concert, or maybe out of fear or whatever, obviously she's the only one who knows because she's still around. But Russell, did not believe any of the horse shit that that was being pushed here, and he was one of the Warren commissioners who they absolutely feared because he wanted to know the truth, So
I love it, Rory. The commission also held executive sessions. It held these in such complete secrecy that even the trusted members of its own staff were kept out. They were presided over by General Counsel J. Lee Rankin, formerly Solicitor General of the United States and later corporate counsel for the city of New York. Unlike the public posture at these top secret executive sessions, the commission members let their hair down. Russell was not alone in voicing deep doubts and misgivings. This too was secret, the guarantee Warren gave his colleagues, whereas all the commission's work was secret except where it was deliberately leaked to condition the public mind and prepared to accept inherently incredible conclusions. These executive sessions were ultra secret. At 2 different sessions, members questioned the presence of the official reporter and asked who would see the transcripts. Warren assured them that nobody else would, not even the most trusted members of their staff. It was 4 years before I did. In early 1968, I obtained Xeroxes of all but a few. I have a box full of them. The last of these captured my eye because of my previous experience. On close examination, I was astounded because it was a fake. It is this that I gave Russell. He was incredulous. Forging an official transcript is without precedent. Who would ever dream that such an exclusive executive session of a presidential commission would have a fake stenographic transcript?
And I have a copy of that transcript, which I'm going to show in a little bit, Jim. Go ahead.
Excellent, excellent. Who would believe that anyone would dare to do such a thing, especially in the investigation of the assassination of a president? Of course, the answer is present president who was complicit in the assassination to cover it up. This trickery deeply disturbed Russell and forced that very executive session to record his disagreement with some of the conclusions. He told me, refused to sign the report. I bucked them, he said. I just put a footnote saying Senator Russell dissents. He told Chief Justice Warren, Commission Chairman, but Warren wanted unanimity. There was a long discussion ending in a compromise. Russell, certain that all his views were preserved for posterity in the transcript, agreed. Russell believed there'd been a conspiracy to kill JFK. So the language he objected to at one point in these 900 pages, the no conspiracy conclusion, was changed to read. Because of the difficulty of proving negatives to a certainty, the possibility of others being involved with either Oswald or Ruby cannot be established categorically. But if there is any such evidence, it has been beyond the reach of all the investigative agencies and resources of the United States, and it's not come to the attention of this commission. Right. Jack Ruby had shot Lee Harvey Oswald in the Dallas police station 2 days after JFK was killed. Not even that appears to be true.
Yeah, I know. That's Ralph.
Yeah.
This represented a considerable yielding on Russell's part because he also had doubts of the performance of the federal investigative agencies, who were also the commission's only investigators, as he had wondered in secret at the last questioning of Marina if the FBI had overlooked anything. In one of the executive sessions he said of the CIA, you can't believe a word they tell you. And of course, Alan Dulles, its former director, was a member of the commission itself.
Yeah.
He told me, I'm satisfied they never told us the whole story about Oswald. And of course, he'd been recruited by the ONI and defected to Russia at the bequest of the CIA and returned to work as an informant for the FBI and all the rest.
Among other agencies.
That's right. Each of these areas of Russell's disagreement with the conclusions and doubts about the integrity of the investigation is a direct assault on the official report, the only solution to the crime. But except for the single disclaimer, the language of which was worked out on that September 18, 1964 executive session and dared not be ignored, in every sense the commitment made to Russell was broken. The commission's conclusions do in fact allege there was no conspiracy in representing Oswald as the lone assassin. They are embodied in the first chapter of the report, summary and conclusions. It also was used as the commission's press release. It says without equivocation that the shots which killed President Kennedy and wounded Governor Connally were fired by Lee Harvey Oswald. Timing is important in understanding how Russell was foiled and how it could have happened. By the time he forced his last executive session of September 18th, the report was in page proof and the presses were ready to roll. They did at midnight 5 days later for general release on September 27, 1964. It was so rushed that the first copy given to President Johnson on the 23rd was a set of proofs 4 inches thick. Now, I repeat, this is supposed to be 900 when it was actually 888. So I wonder if they had in there some preliminary version that included Russell's concerns that they then excluded from the final print run. You went too far, Larry.
Yeah. I'm just scrolling ahead because we have this is a 16-page document, and
okay.
Unless you want to.
Some things are The fakery was, in fact, quite amateurish. Responsibility for it would appear to fall on the shoulders of the general counsel Rankin. No
They were
doubt.
talking about the executive session transcript, the report of the supposed stenographic report that was supposedly given. Yeah.
Correct. The only non-member of the session, the man who alone was responsible for them, and the man who delayed sending this one to the members until long after the commission's work had been ended with the filing of its report. Some things are characteristic of all stenographic transcripts, whether they be of trials or other proceedings. One of these is that court reporting firms are paid by the page.
Yeah.
Therefore, they use typewriters with PIC space. Pica face. This yields fewer words per page, hence more pages which would be paid for the same number of words. Typical. This counter fit was done with an elite, smaller typeface, so clearly it was a fraudulent. This transcript also lacks the cover provided by Ward and Paul, the old established and reputable official reporters.
That's important. That's important, Ward and Paul, because that's the company that it did all the transcripts prior to this one, Jim. And when Weisberg goes and he checks out the vouchers to find out if Ward and Paul had been paid, for doing the transcripts on that particular day, they had never. There was no invoice. Okay?
Right. They hadn't been paid because it was never transcribed.
Because they were never there, and the transcript, the stenographers that were there were fake.
Right. For this commission, Ward and Paul printed a special cover with blanks for information that was typed in to suit each transcript. Interestingly, it includes a small-sized printed notice, stenographic tapes, master sheets, carbon and waste turned over to commission for destruction. Ward and Paul also bound each transcript inside the printed cover, using a 3-hole punch on cover and pages, lacing all together as they did back in the 1930s for me. And in the upper right-hand corner of each cover was printed this gross misrepresentation of the law. Unless the commission's work and report were spurious, this document contains information affecting the national defense of the United States within the meaning of the espionage laws, Title 18 U.S.C. I did not have to go past the first page to know that the so-called transcript of the ultra-secret meeting of Friday, September 18, 1964, was a fabrication. So poor a fabrication, the wrong typewriter was used, the cover was omitted, and the holes were not punched in the left-hand margin. The intent to fake is unhidden.
Unbelievable.
The pagination continues with the last of Ward and Paul's. 7632 is in the upper right-hand corner of the first page. Each of the 5 following are numbered seriatim, meaning in sequence. The Ward and Paul form is found literally. Precisely the same introductory words added by the reporter are prefaced to the manufactured transcript. Under present, each of the 7 members in Rankin are listed. After this, the verbatim remarks appear. The chairman, the commission will be in order. The commission has a number of matters to consider and decide in preparation for the completion of its final report and the closing of its affairs. What blew Russell's mind, as it had mind, is that with this, the bottom of page 7632, all pretense of a verbatim transcript ends. All the rest is paraphrase, carefully edited and purposefully misrepresentative paraphrase. And his record for history, his self-justification, his remarks on the serious doubts about some of the conclusion with support from several other members, they are gone, entirely gone. Less than 4 lines of typing replace all of this. Discussion was had regarding chapters 3 and 4 of the proposed report. The general counsel was instructed to use care that the proposed conclusions concerning such chapters they set forth in chapter would not contain any conflict. Meaning if Russell, therefore, was in dispute, obviously that would have been a conflict.
Not just Russell, Jim, probably Boggs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Hale Boggs, indeed, yeah. And I believe there was at least one other member who was a skeptic.
The way that that Weisberg presents his research, it was probably 3 or 4, Jim.
Yes. Chapter 3 is the shots from the Texas School Book Depository Building. Chapter 4 is the assassin. They contain language with which Russell disagreed, and they are in conflict with Russell's convictions. He was conned, as the quotations show.
By Joseph Ball, he's the one that wrote it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Ball and Rankin were key players. In fact.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Inspector, of course, but, you know, Ball and Rankin, you know.
From this substitute for Russell's historical record, there's no way anyone in the future could glean the slightest indication of the crisis and dispute about its most basic conclusions the commission faced in the last moments of life, nor the remotest notion of the allegation to which Russell would not agree. There's great detail on all the trivia. Warren was authorized to liquidate the commission. To the commissioners was voted 100 copies of the report and hearings bound in Buckram, and in addition, 500 copies of just the report for free distribution. The president, the commissioners, and members of the Kennedy family were given leather-bound copies of the report and the hearings with the names of the proposed recipients stamped on them in gold.
That's quite macabre, if you ask me.
Yeah, as though that would enhance the accuracy of the content. This gift was also voted for each of the staff members who've been with the commission a substantial period of time. They even decided that pictures of the commission be procured and that a total of 100 copies be made for the commissioners that use, and that one copy of such commission picture be provided for each staff member, all at public expense. On the serious and also dubious side, they voted to incorporate into the record in complete blindness a majority of the evidence in excess of 2,100 exhibits, those running from 1054 through 3154, with the same force and effect as any and all other exhibits which had heretofore been offered and received in evidence.
Hey, Gary, how much time do we have here? I need to...
Almost a half hour.
Okay, we're good.
I just flipped it.
It did not make any difference if any member of the commission had seen any of this massive documents just dumped into evidence. It was just as good and bad, had the same force and effect as what they used at the hearings. These housekeeping details and the petty graft are all preserved and top secret for any future reexamination of the crime and for history, which can have no interest in them. What is expunged is Russell's certainty that there had been a conspiracy, his certainty that the executive agencies had withheld much about Oswald and other matters, and his nagging suspicions about the dependability of the investigation himself, on all of which he was, of course, absolutely.
I know, that whole paragraph just sums it all up. I mean,
100% correct.
Yes. Go ahead.
The words of the wise and experienced Russell could be of value in the future, therefore they no longer exist. Rankin was nothing if not cagey.
Of course.
The court reporting contract called for overnight delivery of the transcripts. I have the also top secret delivery records and receipts for all the hundreds of them. Not once did Ward and Paul fail. However, Rankin was taking no chances. Besides, the Constitution had voted to liquidate itself. Its work was done. There was no rush. So he did not give away any of the members a copy of his substitute for their hectic dispute over the essence of their work until a month and a half later, and then had no need for what he sent them on November 5th with an innocuous letter. Their task was completed. They were all only too anxious to forget it and get on with their other obligations. For men like Russell, extraordinarily heavy obligations. Because Russell was aghast at what the destruction of his historic record made for history, and to him, he asked me to explore what the lawyer in him considered could be a loophole, that this fake was prepared despite the existence of the verbatim transcript he was positive had been made. And because he was too busy to examine the other detailed evidence I had a simple official statement from the archivist of the United States certifying, all we have for this session of September 18th was this paraphrase. I sent it to Russell June 14th. He was stunned and convinced. If he had not been, the other evidence I obtained, all top secret, left no possibility of doubt. It includes all the bills rendered by Ward and Paul, all the records of the assignments and court reporters to each of the commission's proceedings, the pages of transcript and the take of each reporter, the number of copies of each transcript prepared, a complete record of all work done by Ward and Paul in the fullest and finest detail. No official reporter had been ordered for this session. No bill was rendered for it. Under date of June 18th for the busy Russell, Campbell explained that in addition to his regular Senate attendance, Russell had committee meetings almost daily. Therefore, this and his other duties limit the senator's time presently, but you may be assured that he will be in touch with you after study of what I had given him. Russell was
just in case people are wondering, Campbell was Russell's assistant, Jim.
Right. Russell was more interested in the matter which you raise and will undoubtedly devote more attention to them when it's possible for him to do so. Fate was to decree otherwise. That August, while Congress was in research, I sent Russell more. On August 29th, Campbell wrote that Russell was in Georgia and said what is quite unlike the public impression that all the members of the commission opposed any inquiry into their work. I'm sure he will appreciate your sharing with him the results of your most recent efforts. Meanwhile, Russell's break with Johnson took place. First public notion of it was by Jack Bell of the Associated Press. This November 10 story reported that despite their past closeness, it has been more than 3 months since they had a difference of opinion over a matter Russell doesn't even discuss with friends, which of course would have been no doubt that final meeting and the transcripts thereof.
Well, yeah, not only that, but that Russell obviously resented how Johnson had pushed him, into taking this position.
Right. He was a pawn. On
That's right.
LBJ's chessboard.
And we know that LBJ, was the master, at doing that. So.
Oh yes. Yeah. Russell, who had been Johnson's close confidant and advisor, was out of touch with LBJ completely. Not only did they no longer see each other, LBJ stopped telling others to check it out with Dick. It had been Russell, Bell recalled, who started Johnson on his way up the senatorial ladder by making him first Democratic whip and then party leader. A month before this, on October 12th, Russell had announced he was dropping the chairmanship of the Senate Armed Forces Committee to accept that of the Appropriations Committee, which was being vacated by resignation. Both are prestigious and important posts. During the 15 years Russell had headed armed forces, he had made the military and servicing its needs a major factor in Georgia's economy. Politically, the armed forces chairmanship meant much to him. In resigning it, he also divested himself of all CIA oversight responsibilities. For as Armed Forces Committee chairman, he was also chairman of that super secret committee.
Let's pause there and digest, the importance of all of this that you've just read, Jim, because this is politics. This is how politics is done in the U.S., okay? And when somebody, of the stature of Russell starts to resign, to these committees and everything, and who was a very, very, very important person, and obviously has to do with, what was going on with the JFK assassination.
After Congress reconvened on January 7, 1969, Russell wrote me that, with reference to your continuing investigation of the assassination of the late president, while I'm still very much interested, the increased demands on my time make it impossible for me to pursue this matter further at this time. If I have an opportunity to do so later, I will notify you promptly. I think he saw the futility of it all as long as Johnson was president, and he might actually be at risk of harm.
Yeah.
Later, in early 1969, doctors discovered an inoperable tumor in his left lung. Russell had suffered from emphysema for more than a decade. It's a degenerative and debilitating disease that wore him down. He knew he was in terminal illness. The next year, Russell went public with some of his doubts, making a discreet record and a taped interview aired on the Georgia-based Cox TV network. Prior to the broadcast, some of his remarks were released. They included his doubt about Oswald as the lone assassin, meaning no conspiracy. I think someone else worked with him. After taping the broadcast, he wrote to me on January 30th, 1970, that my duties simply preclude me from spending the time required to do justice to any further inquiry into this complicated series of events. But I am interested that you are continuing your work, and there are a number of matters in the investigation which would be of interest to me if I had the time to devote to them. To his dying day, Russell encouraged me to pursue my own independent investigation. He had his own doubts. He was certain there had been a conspiracy, and he was just as certain that the executive branch investigative agencies, which supplied all the commission's investigative services, had not told them all and had told them wrongly. This secret record, which I now make public for the first time, is hardly the representation of official apologists who believe there's no basis for disbelief in the solution to the assassination of the popular young president. The senior member of the Presidential Commission was not satisfied. He shared my doubt and was troubled. Russell realized the political significance of there being no transcript of that top secret final executive session, and of the fact that it had been arranged that could not be one. That he intended to record his objections was known to Rankin. As much as it shook Russell, he was not about to publicize so monstrous a scandal. He was a kind of patriot who thought he had to spare the country the shock of this frightening destruction.
Wow.
I think it is significant that while Russell did not break that long friendship with Lyndon Johnson, when Johnson deceived him and behind his back appointed him to the commission, that long friendship did end after I gave Russell this proof of the destruction of his historic record and of his disbelief in the official solution to the crime of the century. His refusal to discuss this rupture, even with close friends, is explained by what he told me that day in June of 1968, while we were walking to the Senate chambers from his office. He had smiled in telling me of Johnson's cunning and of learning first from the media that he'd been appointed to the commission. You just can't refuse the President of the United States, even when he does something like this. By Russell's code, and particularly with Johnson still alive, he just could not do other than preserve the silence he took to the grave with his doubts and encourage me to develop the evidence he was certain existed. Secrecy was not the name of the game. It was, in the new Washington jargon, the game plan itself. Without secrecy, none of this could have happened. There would have been no withheld evidence like that spectrographic analysis that can destroy the entire solution to this crime on which all of history turned, and there would be no lingering doubts. In courts of law, there is no secret evidence, no witnesses interviewed behind barred doors only. Yet this commission interviewed no witnesses any other way. All of its proceedings were secret. It even invoked these espionage acts to keep them secret. Why?
I just want to mention that when he talks about the spectrographic analysis, for those who are not familiar with this, there is a case that Weisberg pursued for probably more than a decade on the spectrographic analysis of the fragments of the bullets, because spectrographic analysis will determine if a batch of any type of lead or metal comes from the same
batch. Same batch of lead.
Right. And specifically, he was looking for the spectrographic analysis on the material that had bounced off of the curb, on the curb, where the FBI even went and dug out the entire curbside, and they put it over in the National Archives, and then it got lost. Okay, and
surprise.
Yeah, one of Weisberg's main cases that went as a FOIA request. And it had to do specifically with the spectrographic analysis of that area of the curb, which would have proven where exactly that metal had come from. So that's what that's all about.
Right. That in particular appearing to have been one of the 3 shots fired from the Dow Tech spy.
Yeah, because it had come from the same batch. Obviously, it would have been it would have supported the lone nut. Had it not been from the same batch, then it would have been from different weapons.
Right. Why could not the people know the testimony as it was adduced, as happens in courts of law? Why could the press not report each hearing, as is the case in trials? Why was it necessary to hide the fact that witnesses were undependable, that the right questions were not asked, that the most basic evidence was not even seen by the commissions? These questions state realities. The most incredible witnesses were credited, the most obvious questions were never asked, and the quintessential evidence was avoided with great diligence. Had all the proceedings not been in secret, none of this would have been possible. Indeed, it would not have been dared. It was go ahead.
Yeah, if you remember in the JFK movie when Kevin Costner was saying, "Go ahead, ask the question. Why aren't you asking the question?"
That's the scene where he's reading one of the volumes in the Warren Commission. Exactly, Gary. That's a good point. And and he's following the narrative, and he's saying, wait, ask the question. Obviously,
Come on. Yeah, ask the question. Why aren't you asking the question?
Yeah.
Very good.
It was not necessary in any complete and forthright investigation, as it is not necessary in courts of law which go further and prohibit it. It was necessary only because this commission undertook not an investigation, but an attempt to validate a preconception, to make it possible to believe what could not be believed, that a lone nut had done the job all alone without any accomplices. The reasons were political, to preserve tranquility and stability, not to rock the boat, and of course to cover up the complicity of those behind the scene, including Alan Dulles himself, but most especially LBJ and his henchmen and dozens and dozens of others who were complicit in the event.
Yeah.
The dozens of thousands of pages of the commission's What Secret Records I have, so many thousands that there are more than 2,000 I have not yet read, leave no doubt on this score. The preconception is what Russell could not hold down. The crime was impossible for any one man. This meant there had been a conspiracy. Even Lyndon Johnson was certain of this. Who better in position than the man who had initiated the assassination of his predecessor?
Who ducked at the time?
When he taped a series of TV interviews on his presidency, he said so, but this part was edited out because he was clever and he knew if he said it during an interview, people would tend to think he wasn't involved or he wouldn't have said it, which was exactly why he said it. That, however, followed the rupture of the long friendship between him and Russell. Before he died, Johnson claimed that he had privately asked further investigation of the Department of Justice to no end. This also he did after the break with Russell.
Do you believe that? Do you believe that, Jim?
No, I don't believe it for a second. Lyndon was used to telling robbers. They said of him that he lied even when he didn't need to lie.
He didn't have to lie.
Some things are too hot to be permitted to exist even in deepest secrecy. One of these was the record Russell believed he was making in secret, so top secret the staff was not trusted to share it. The former Chief Justice, who was commission chairman, was responsible for all the secrecy, also assured worried members that nobody would ever see their words recorded at their executive sessions. After the Watergate, which is also characterized by secrecy and the abuse of trust and violation of all traditional and proper procedures, the same former Chief Justice put it all together in a fine address. He delivered it a month after the 10th anniversary of the assassination at the annual Drew Pearson Awards for Excellent Reporting. Quote, "It would be difficult to name a more effective ally of corruption than secrecy. Corruption is never flaunted to the world. In government, it is invariably practiced through secrecy. That secrecy is to be found at every level of government, to the White House. And if anything is to be learned from our present difficulties, compendiously known as Watergate, is that we must open our public affairs to public scrutiny. We should first strike at secrecy in government wherever it exists." And from the Warren Commission of Watergate, secrecy is the game plan by which it was pulled off. As George Santayana said, those who did not learn from history are doomed to relive it. That ally of corruption, the secrecy with which Russell's disbelief was first hidden and then destroyed, may have made Watergate possible as it made an acceptable solution to the crime of the century impossible. The doubts must and will linger until there are honest answers to all the unanswered questions.
That's amazing. That's an amazing document, and I wanna go on real quickly here because
Time Magazine. Wow.
Yeah, Richard Russell. This is the actual executive session, Jim, that exists, and this is what Harold went and fought for so long after. And actually what they did was they did a report on expenses. And this is the actual document that he fought over. And instead of being, the executive session, okay, I'm at the page 16. Let me scroll up here. Here it is. Here we go. Okay. Okay, this is the actual report, Lee Rankin, J. Lee Rankin, and this is Friday, September the 18th, 1964. Okay, and this is the actual transcript that was falsified. And this is the one that Harold Weisberg fought in court, for so long, and which, eventually when he got his hands on it, he went and he confronted Senator Russell with it. And that's how this whole story unfolds. Now, here's a really interesting one, because the National Enquirer wanted to do a story on this, okay? And lo and behold, here is the actual letter that they sent Harold, where Harold had written most of the article and done all the research. And it's just fascinating to see that even the National Enquirer didn't want anything to do with this. Okay, so it just gives you an idea. At least the National Enquirer at that time. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they hadn't passed up the New York Times as far as credibility is concerned.
Yeah. See, they even had a picture of Harold and everything for the article, and it tells the exact story that we just.
Why don't I go through the story that they didn't publish?
Okay, well, it's how long? It's 8 pages long. Let me see. I'll show you. Let me see if I can get some highlights here for you. Well, it's double spaced. It's the actual article.
I know. I get it. That's why I want to read it.
Okay, go ahead.
Certain evidence was withheld from members of the Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and on occasion misleading evidence was deliberately fed to the commission. This was the firm conclusion of the late Senator Richard Russell, Democrat from Georgia and commission member, but his fears went to the grave with him when he died in January 1971 at the age of 73, says Harold Weisberg, former Senate investigator, author, and longtime critic of the Warren Report, in an astonishing executive interview with the Enquirer. Says Weisberg, when I finally got the transcripts of the executive session of the committee that had been top secret, were declassified in February 1968, I decided to get in touch with Senator Russell, who I knew had misgivings which were not contained in the report. I wrote to the senator's office, and his legislative assistant, Mr. Charles Campbell, called me in response. Originally, all of his end was by phone because I think the senator was worried I was trying to booby trap him. He wanted to be able to preserve deniability. But toward the end, he was writing me directly. He was not even using his assistant because he saw I wasn't about to abuse his trust. I was able to give Campbell certain information, and I was called into the senator's office to talk to Campbell further, I thought. I did not expect to see the senator, but Campbell took me in and introduced me. Senator Russell was walking over to the floor of the Senate and asked me if I'd care to walk with him. And as we walked, we talked. Russell was satisfied there was a conspiracy, satisfied he and the other members had been conned on the ballistic evidence, satisfied that the agencies, he didn't mention names, but it was pretty clear he meant CIA and FBI, had not told the commission what they knew about Oswald. I think it's probable that the senator thought there was a red conspiracy, communist, a view I disagreed with because, in my opinion, the real Oswald belief was decidedly anti-communist. But in any event, Russell was satisfied that on at least those 3 points he had been had. At an early stage, he was dubious about the value of Marina Oswald's testimony on just about anything, and he was quoted as saying that he was convinced that the commission was never told the truth about Oswald's life together in Russia. Nor did he ever accept a single bullet theory, the commission's contention that the same bullet that hit President Kennedy had hit President Kennedy and Governor Connally. The senator formally objected to the commission's categorical statement that there had been no conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy. He said it gave the impression that no other living person had any knowledge of Oswald's plan. He wanted the report to go further than saying Oswald fired the shots that killed President Kennedy and wounded Governor Connally. Russell raised these objections at a special executive session on September 18th when the report was ready to go to the printers and the page proofs were only a week away from being on Lyndon Johnson's desk. The reason this session was called was because Russell and possibly a couple of other commission members were not in agreement with certain parts of the report, and they wanted to thrash that out. Chief Justice Warren was determined he was going to have a unanimous report, so rather than allowing Russell to have an asterisk, And then down at the bottom of the page, Senator Russell dissents as follows. A disclaimer sentence was inserted at Russell's assistant. It said, because of the difficulty of proving negatives to a certainty, the possibility of others being involved with either Oswald or Ruby cannot be established categorically. But if there is any such evidence, it has been beyond the reach of all the investigative agencies and resources of the United States and has not come to the attention of this commission. But even there, says Weisberg, Russell was conned. The disclaimer was only inserted in a later chapter. It was not put into chapter 1, which also served as the commission's press release. So the stories that appeared in papers around the world had no mention of Russell's fears. Some years after this executive session, I was able to give the senator information that really shocked him. A transcript of every meeting of the commission was taken by a reporter, with the exception of the first 2 meetings, whose minutes were taken by a reporter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Every meeting was attended by a reporting firm of Ward and Paul, who delivered the minutes the following day, but not that last meeting on September 18th. When the records of the payments to Ward and Paul became declassified in February 1968, I got copies, and there was no payment to a court reporter that day. There was not even a court reporter there that day, but the members of the commission did not know that. They thought a transcript was being made for the future. So they recorded their objections at the meeting. They wanted to preserve their own reputations and their own integrity. I'm sure they very cleverly suggested, we'll let you introduce any concerns you have in our final meeting before publication, so they can be taken into account, and then simply played them for saps. But instead of the minutes of that meeting being taken down by a reporter and issued the next day, a document purporting to be minutes of the meeting was sent out to the commission members on November 5th, almost 6 weeks after the report was published, from General Counsel Lee Rankin's office.
Of course.
And the document was not the minutes of the meeting. At best, it was a synopsis of part of the meeting, whom to give leather-bound copies of the report to, a winding up of the business affairs of the commission, and things like that. There was no mention of any objections being made.
We just showed our audience the actual document. So go ahead.
Yes. I brought this to Senator Russell's attention, and as I said before, he was very shocked, but still he had a hope. He said that perhaps the National Archive did have the original transcript and were not letting me see it. I got in touch with the archives, and they told me that the document I had, the one that had been sent from the General Counsel's office, was the only minutes of the meeting. Then Russell realized that the record he had left for posterity, the record of what his beliefs were, had been destroyed. He would never have talked about this in public. It was too big a scandal, and he was too dedicated to government. Government insiders never want scandals exposed. They will rant and rave about them privately, but they will be totally silent in public. When the senator finally accepted that what I was telling him was the truth, he was absolutely shaken. He could not believe it. I would say the political significance of there being no transcript of that meeting, when it was known that the members were going to record their objections for history and posterity, was much more persuasive to a politician like Russell than all the facts I could have put in his hand, that is to say, as to the existence of conspiracy. I can't imagine any documentary proof I could have given him that would have meant as much to a man who had spent his lifetime in politics. Certainly, it is my belief that this revelation changed the senator. I gave him the information in June of 1968. The following October, the Associated Press reported the communication lines between President Lyndon Johnson and Senator Russell, one of the president's oldest friends and advisors, had been broken. The news service, it had been more than 3 months since the two men had a difference of opinion over a matter that Russell did not even discuss with his friends. I think the significant thing is that while Russell did not break his friendship with Johnson after he was appointed to the commission, much against his wishes, the close association between the two men, which went back almost 20 years to Johnson's freshman senator days, was ruptured very soon after Russell discovered that he had been duped. And
this is
all the way with LBJ.
And Jim, for the National Enquirer to just trash that article.
No. Larry, that was political. That came down from the highest level. The reporters wanted to publish it. This is very frequently the case.
Of
They
course.
had a sensational story of enormous importance, but it was killed. It was killed politically.
Absolutely. That's my point. That's my point.
Drop the screen share, Larry. Drop the screen share from your end.
Do you
Okay.
think that Senator Russell was one of the conspicuous deaths or early deaths?
No, I think he
No.
actually died of emphysema. But the fact
he died of lung cancer.
he was a truth seeker. He was a principled man. He was a man of enormous integrity. He got played by a very duplicitous, masterful politician who, in fact, had been the brains behind the assassination of JFK, namely.
No, and not only that, and the time that he lived in the history with the civil rights and everything in Georgia and everything, obviously he was in a very, very difficult situation there. But still, with
he was fighting against civil rights.
That's right, Gary. Thank you. And he having been bamboozled by LBJ the way he was, and trying to have at least somebody like Harold Weisberg who was so diligent and brought so much evidence to him to show him what was going on, and him even going through the experience, because it's pretty obvious, we've talked about here that he himself interviewed Marina and he did not believe anything that Marina said. Okay, and he suspected what was going on here. So I think Richard Russell, and that's why I want to thank, we have to, Len, for bringing this topic up and us expanding on it the way that we have here tonight, and showing and really developing a lot more about this story. And
I want to thank you for bringing it up, Larry. Very important. I'm very glad we covered it. Gary, excellent show. Richard Russell was an admirable American, unlike some of those who were actually in a position to control and manage access to the information he would otherwise have provided to the American people.
Well, you have to understand also the times. A senator, has this incredible visibility, and he has to toe a certain line. Okay, and when having been a Warren commissioner, being pressed into that service that he was by LBJ, and it's just an incredible story. I think.
We get it, Larry, and we're glad we had the chance to tell it tonight. Thanks to you.
All right.
Gary?
Just out. Show number 214. Another one in the bag. Thank you a lot, Larry. Great research. We'll see you next time.
Adios.